Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. It is a Wednesday, and it feels like Friday. I almost said it. I think it was wishful thinking, but it's just Wednesday. We are all still, I think, recovering a little bit from yesterday from our election coverage. I know John and I both pulled some late nights last night, and we know that we do have a result in that Alabama Senate race. We do know that Republican challenger Tommy Tuberville has taken that U.S. Senate seat, flipping it from Democratic Senator Doug Jones. So that was some news that we got last night. We are still waiting on that presidential election result. We know that President Trump has taken Alabama, but we're still waiting for those nationwide results and the race for each of those candidates to get to 270. So we thought it would be an interesting take today to look at a map that one of our reporters over at AL.com created that shows which counties in Alabama went for what. And by that, I mean which counties voted for Trump, for Biden, for Jones, and for Tuberville. So y'all let me know what counties you want to know about, and we'll show them to you. I'll pull up that map here and kind of leave it here so you can get an idea. The more blue a county is, obviously, the more Biden and Jones it went. The more red, the more Trump it went. Now, these lighter colors, the white that you can see Jefferson County there in the upper middle of your screen, that is a real in the middle of the road color. So I already got people asking. I'm going to get to your counties in just a second. But John, before we do that, let's talk about the record turnout we saw. We know that of 3.7 million registered voters in Alabama, we have so far we have seen about 2.3 million ballots cast. That's a huge number.
Yeah, it is. I mean, certainly more votes than we've ever seen in Alabama presidential election history or in any election history. It's more than we saw in 2016. Trump marginally has improved so far on his 2016 numbers, and the Democratic candidate in this case, not Tommy Tuberville, and sorry, like you said, long night. In this case, Joe Biden has improved on Hillary Clinton's turnout from 4 years ago, but clearly not enough to be decisive. It was not enough to even close the margin of victory. So far, below 60%.
Well, and we know that
we still have some outstanding absentee ballots that haven't been counted yet, which may shrink that margin a little bit. A lot of Democrats voted in-person absentee and mail-in absentee, and some of those will trickle in over the days ahead. But again, we're talking percentage points, not enough to sway anything one way or the other.
And we know that that race between Tommy Tuberville and Doug Jones was called about 10 after 9 p.m. Yesterday. We know that though the race in Alabama, the presidential race, was called for Donald Trump in Alabama just a couple of minutes after the polls closed. That was a very early race that was called, but we had to wait a little bit longer for that Senate race. So we're going to start looking at some of these counties. First, I've got a couple people like Roderick, Samantha asking about Jefferson County, and that is this white block of the map that you see towards the upper middle of your screen. Now, John, let me know if you can see these numbers that I've pulled up here. But Jefferson, we have the Trump votes were 129,000, Biden votes 140,000. So just a couple of more, just about 10,000 more here for Joe Biden. And those percentage were 51% Biden and 47% Trump. John, is that what we expected to see?
I mean, right now it's a little bit closer for Trump than it was even just 4 years ago. And for 2016, he had 134,000, and right now he has improved on that number here in Alabama by 6,000. Or no, actually, I'm sorry, I was reading those numbers backwards. He's actually down 5,000 there. So Jefferson County went slightly more Democratic this time than it did last go around. And I think Jefferson County is also one where we may see a few more absentee votes come in the next 24, 48 hours.
So we are still waiting on some of those absentee votes.
I believe so. And Jefferson County, I mean, yes, we expect Jefferson County. It's like all cities across the country. Cities are primarily voting Democratic, and suburbs are a mixed bag, and rural areas are white rural areas are majority going Republican, and as we'll talk about here in a few minutes, majority Black rural areas are going Democratic. And I think a lot of people will say, well, rural areas vote Republican and urban areas vote Democratic. And clearly, as we look at this map, that is not the case. Demographics matter in terms of rural-urban divide.
I'm going to go through a couple more of these counties. You've got, I'm just going in order as I see them. Etowah, you have a bigger margin here for Trump, 74% to Trump and 24% to Joe Biden. That was about, let's say, 24,000 votes difference. It was a pretty, no, not that much. Y'all know I'm not very good at math, but it was a pretty big jump there in Etowah. So you can see the differences when you look at a county like Jefferson versus a county like Etowah. Now let's go to Franklin. I got to brush up a little bit on my Alabama county geography here. Haven't done that in a minute. Franklin, again, we're seeing similar numbers. Like John mentioned, some of these counties you see that are more rural are going a little bit more towards Trump. In Franklin County, we've got over 10,000 votes for Trump, a little bit over 2,000 for Biden. So that's 82% Trump and 16% Biden. Now, we will note that some of those counties we just talked about, Etowah, Franklin, those also went to Tommy Tuberville. We know that Jefferson did go for Doug Jones, but, we've got about over 90% of those precincts in. But as John mentioned, we're still waiting on some of those absentee ballots, especially those from some of these bigger counties. Let's go down to Pike. Pike is interesting because it is just below Montgomery County, which did go for Biden, did go for Jones. It's just a little bit south, and it is kind of in that middle area, that kind of whitish color, the middle of the road. Right now, we do know Trump is leading 58% to Biden's at 40%. John, what do you think about counties kind of in this area that are that more lighter colored red or white? We've got Pike, Butler, Conecuh, Monroe, Clark, all of in that kind of that same region.
Yeah, so if you look at the region just above it, the blue region, that is the region that we know as the Black Belt. It's called that because of the soil there, but it also is the highest concentration of Black voters in Alabama outside of the major urban areas. Counties like Pike are where the Black Belt starts to become the Wiregrass, and the Wiregrass is a wider region, and it's a more conservative region. It's probably a toss-up between that region and the northwest corner and northeast corners as to which are the most conservative corners of Alabama. And so that's why counties like Pike, which have, probably north of Pike County is part of the Black Belt, and south of Pike County is part of the Wiregrass region, or at least demographically, that's where populations are shifting there. And so that's why these counties tend to be the toss-up counties.
They're in that kind of, like you said, they're in that weird geographical region where they're really sandwiched between the traditionally Democratic Black Belt and the traditionally conservative Wiregrass area. And they're really just sandwiched in between. There's no other way to say that. Yeah,
exactly. And a lot of that comes down to turnout and to demographics. But I think we also saw Pike County go, they voted for Donald Trump in 2016 as well by 7,693 votes then. So he improved by about 400 votes over his vote total in 2016, whereas Biden is up by about 600 votes over Hillary Clinton's turnout in 2016. So again, turnout was higher in that county, but it wasn't high enough for the Democrats to close the gap. So it's certainly in line with this map. Looks like almost every map we will see in Alabama politics going back to 2008 at least, which is interesting.
It is interesting. Somebody asked about Madison and they said, is that the white spot? Yes, you are right. I think I forget who asked the question here. I think it was maybe Amanda asking about Madison. So yes, that almost white spot is just a kind of a tinge red. I don't know if you can tell that from the color on your screen, but it is just slightly above for Trump, 52.8% Trump to 44.8% Biden. And we will note that Madison County did vote, I believe, voted for Tuberville, or is at least in that region.
Yeah.
It was not on our list for Doug Jones.
Yeah, that's right. And, Madison is one of those counties that I think Alabama Democratic Party has circled as an area that they hope they can flip. Anthony Daniels, Democratic House Minority Leader, is from there. So he's one of the more prominent Democrats in the state. And obviously, it's the fastest growing region of Alabama. And so that might lead to some demographic changes over time. But it compared to the other cities in the state, Montgomery, Mobile, and Birmingham, Huntsville City and Madison County is still much wider than those cities. And in Alabama, demographics kind of determine party vote for the most part. It's obviously not 1-to-1, but white people tend to vote Republican in Alabama, and black people tend to vote Democrat in Alabama, and that's why these maps look like they do. Madison is one of those areas where, it's heavily based on military spending and federal spending, and so there's some indication that they like government spending, but only on certain things, and those certain things tend to be Republican issues.
I have another question about Madison County I want to ask you, John, but quickly looking through some of these comments, I do want to go ahead and note that that presidential race has not been called nationally. Yes, Alabama has been called to go for Donald Trump, has not been called nationally, still waiting on several states there. So there is no results there. We're not going to call that race, and we go by the Associated Press race results, and the Associated Press has not called that race either. So still a lot up in the air, both paths to victory for both of those candidates. Now, I want to go back to Madison really quickly. You talk really, you make some interesting points about the military spending there, about the population of Madison County, about the city of Huntsville, the demographics there. Why is Madison County, though, just a little bit less conservative than all of those surrounding areas up top? I mean, we see that next door, we have Jackson County, pretty red. We have just a little bit down, we've got the Blount, Coleman, and even Morgan and Limestone that are definitely more red than Madison. What is going on across those county lines?
Sure. I mean, it's the difference between cities, suburbs, and exurbs, and rural parts of Alabama. Jackson County, you're really kind of starting to get into the foothills of Appalachia there, and then DeKalb County and Etowah County. And then Madison County is almost exclusively, in terms of voting population, Huntsville and then Madison voters. And, I mean, clearly Alabama's different from a lot of the country, or Huntsville City is different from a lot of the country in these regards. But generally, we are seeing people in cities, people in suburbs, and people who have college degrees and higher education degrees like PhDs have mostly voted Democratic this election cycle and last election cycle. And that's everybody in Madison County for the most part. I mean, I'm painting with a very broad brush, but that's the majority of voters in Madison County. And so it's actually interesting that Madison is probably one of the few cities, that has a university there, has a high concentration of PhDs, and is a majority urban and suburban district, and it's one of the few that's not blue. I think that would make it an outlier, and it's something that we're going to have to probably dig more into as reporters in the weeks ahead.
That's really interesting, and I want to get to a couple of more of these southern counties. We've got questions on Chambers and Clark. I'm going to get there in a minute, but first, I have a question that I want to ask your thoughts on, John, and that is, this is a question from Carl. Carl says Alabama needs to recount these votes, and he mentioned later by hand, saying that the numbers don't add up with the candidates and the issues on the ballots. What is your response to that? Do you believe that Alabama is going to need to recount some of their votes, and especially by hand and not using those counting machines?
I mean, I guess I won't go into what I think they need to do, but I mean, we are not at a margin of threshold for a mandatory recount. So, I mean, they will not be recounting these votes. There's enough of a margin that it's not automatic recount territory.
So we're not quite there yet.
Right. And I could maybe speak to Carl's point about some of the numbers not adding up. I mean, there are people who go in and they, check straight ticket Republican, straight ticket Democrat, and then they turn in their ballot and leave. And some people don't flip it over and vote for the amendments. Some people look at the amendments and say, oh, well, this is an amendment specifically to Franklin County. I'm not going to weigh in on that. So even if numbers don't add up where we're not seeing as many people voting for, the First Amendment on the ballot as voted for the presidential race, some of that drop off is to be expected. Democratic voters, for example, in most places in the state did not have candidates running for every office. So a straight ticket Democratic voter maybe isn't voting in, their local county clerk's race because there's not a Democratic candidate there. And so that's why if you look at individual races, some of the numbers may not add up. And I hope that answers your question, Carl. If not, I'm happy to answer it better.
That's an interesting point I didn't think about, John. So I got questions again on Chambers Clark. This is kind of that region John and I were speaking about a minute ago that is between the Black Belt and then also between the Wiregrass. So you see between, I'm going to click out of this, so you can see that blue kind of stripe down the middle, that is the Black Belt. And then that really kind of darker red stripe below it is the Wiregrass. So it's interesting that you have kind of that belt of the white and lighter colored red. I'm really fascinated by that. And I know that kind of makes me and John extremely nerdy on this end, but it's very interesting there to see just the change between some of these counties that are neighbors. Now you see Choctaw County and Sumter County. Choctaw has got 57% Trump based on Sumter's 25% Trump. So it's just kind of crazy the change you get in just a few miles south. Now, Clark, we had a question about. Clark is about 55.8% Trump, Biden 40 at 3.8%. And then we had another question on, let's see, you said Chambers and Clark. Let me go to Chambers. But it is just a really interesting look at this whole area. Now, if, let's see, Chambers, I told y'all we didn't have enough coffee today. I know. Here we go. Chambers is kind of very similar to Clark, actually. 57% Trump, 41% Biden. So, John, I know we talked about that region between Black Belt and Wiregrass. What about this region over here on the east side of Alabama that goes almost in a straight line down? It's Chambers, Lee, Russell, and Barber. We have that kind of glide into that region in South Alabama, but those, excuse me, those four counties going down the east side are pretty much all equally light colored, meaning they're equally kind of on the fence.
Yeah. So, I mean, some of that is that same demographic shift we were talking about going from the Black Belt into the Wiregrass and into the Appalachian foothills a little further north there. And then some of it is probably, similar to Tuscaloosa County, right? You have Lee County, the Auburn-Opelika region, that is going to have a lot of professors and academics and university employees and college students. And, nationally, those are populations that tend to be voting Democratic in this election cycle and the last election cycle. Lee County is also obviously, we just mentioned it's home to Auburn University. So that is should have probably been clearer red for Tommy Tuberville than it was, to be honest. And so that, I think that's interesting. Another thing is just across the Georgia border there, you've got military base. So you have a lot of people who are transplants that may be living in Eastern Alabama. And again, I think if you were to take these percentages and you were to lay them alongside census data for demographics, it's going to be very similar. Clark County, I think you said, was 55% Trump, and I think it's somewhere around 55-45 white-black divide there too. And so I think that's where some of these numbers line up almost perfectly with census demographic data, which is interesting.
Well, and we should note too that some of these counties that Doug Jones won and also that Joe Biden won include Wilcox County, which is the home county to Governor Kay Ivey, who is Republican. Wilcox County, Russell County, Sumter County, all of pretty much the Black Belt counties, and then also a Hale County, Jefferson County went to Biden and to Doug Jones. Before we go, I want to look quickly at these extreme blue and extreme red counties. Now, it looks like to me our reddest counties here are Cleburne County, Blount County, Coleman County, Winston County, and Marion County. Those are all kind of the reddest counties we've got. And then on the flip side, the bluest counties we have Greene County, Macon County, Perry County, and Lowndes County. So you really can see it's really interesting to me that kind of upper middle Alabama is very red. That lower middle Alabama is very blue. John, what can we take away from this map? And does this give us any kind of hint on what we can expect nationally to see in this presidential race?
Well, it's funny because we obviously talk about the Black Belt. If you just did almost a flip, it's not quite perfect, but if you did a flip over Jefferson County, there's a region that you could almost call the White Belt, because in most instances they're very similar regions. It's rural. We've seen hospitals close in those regions in recent times. We've seen a lot of we've seen the opioid epidemic hit that area very hard, and so what seems to be dividing those voters right now is mostly race. The Black Belt is primarily Black. And what I'm going to call the White Belt, that red region that you're talking about right there, is primarily white. And so even though there's a lot of similarities between issues that those regions are facing, the party identification and the candidates that those voters are responding to are very different. That's just how kind of the party line has shaken out here in Alabama, and it's pretty similar to what the party line is shaking out in nationwide. In some parts of the country, in the Midwest, for example, we are seeing Biden has made some inroads among white voters more than he did in states like Alabama and Mississippi and Tennessee. But really, why Biden has now taken the lead in Wisconsin and in Michigan, and potentially, which I think would be most surprising, take the lead in Georgia, is that most of the vote that's still outstanding there is urban vote. And it's primarily Black voters, which are overwhelmingly voting Democratic this cycle. And so that has given him the path to eat into the margins there, where I think now most people, and again, like you said, we're going by AP numbers, but a lot of people are projecting that he will have insurmountable leads in Wisconsin and Michigan by the time everything is said and done. And so I think that's what would be probably the difference between an Alabama and a Georgia, or an Alabama and a Michigan, for instance. White rural voters in those states tend to be voting Republican across the country. Black rural voters tend to be voting Democratic across the country. Numbers have gone slightly in both places, but overwhelmingly, urban voters, both white and Black, have voted Democrat this cycle. And it's just cities like Detroit, or cities like Chicago, or cities like Atlanta, or even cities in North Carolina. They've got several cities, none quite as big as that, but cities like Charlotte are just much bigger than cities like Birmingham and cities like Huntsville. And so Birmingham and Jefferson County had very similar trends to what we've seen nationwide. It's just Alabama's cities are not mega cities like Atlanta. And so if Alabama, if Birmingham were the size of Atlanta, then Alabama would possibly be a toss-up like Georgia has been a toss-up. Because if you look at Georgia's map, it's very similar to our map. Northwest corner of Georgia is very red. Atlanta and the surrounding counties are blue. And then the region that is their Black Belt is very blue. And then they have a couple other cities that have gone blue as well.
It is. It's going to be an interesting day, no doubt. We know that maybe election day is over, but the election day activities, meaning the counting, watching the returns, those are not over, and it looks like we're going to have them all day and maybe even past today. So, John, thanks so much for coming, breaking this down a little bit for us. I will leave a link here in the comment thread to our story about this. In that story, you can see the map that John and I were just talking about. You can go in and play with it and click on the counties you want to see. I'll make sure that you have that link, I should say, here in the comments. And other than that, thank y'all so much for joining us today. I know you might have had a long night as well. John and I are going to go get some coffee and prepare for another long day. So everybody, thank you so much for watching, and we will see you tomorrow.
Thanks, guys.